Ranger's Apprentice, Book 1, Runes of Gorlan, by John Flanagan. Prologue. Morgorath, Lord of the Mountains of Rain and Night, former Baron of Gorlan in the Kingdom of Arwen, looked over his bleak, rain-swept domain and, for perhaps the 1000th time, cursed. This was all that was left of him now, a jumble of rugged granite cliffs, tumbled boulders and icy mountains, of sheer gorge and steep narrow passes, of gravel and rock, with never a tree or a sign of a green to break the monotony. Even though it had been 15 years since he had been driven back into his forbidding realm that had become his prison, he could still remember the pleasant green glades and thick forest hills of his former fief. The streams filled with fish and the fields rich with crops and game. Gorlan had become a beautiful living place. The mountains of rain and night were dead and desolate. A platoon of wargles was drilling in the castle yard below him. Morgorath watched them for a few seconds, listening to the guttural rhythmic chant that accompanied all their movements. They were stocky, misshapen beings, with features that were halfway human, both a long, bristle-like muzzle and fangs like a bear or a large dog. Avoiding all contact with humans, the wargles had lived in these and bred in these remote mountains since ancient times. No one in living memory had ever set eyes upon one, but rumors and legends had persisted of savage tribe of semi-intelligent beasts in the mountains. Morgorath, planning a revolt against the king of Arwen, had left Gorlan fief to seek them out. If such creatures existed, they would give him an edge in war that was to come. It took him months, but eventually he found them. Aside from their wordless chants, wargles had no spoken language, relying on a primitive form of thought awareness for communication. But their minds were simple and their intelligence basic. As a result, they had been totally susceptible to domination by superior intelligence and willpower. Morgorath bent them to his will, and they became the perfect army for him, ugly beyond nightmares, utterly pitiless, and bound totally by his mental orders. Now, looking at him, he remembered the brightly dressed knights in glittering armor who used to compete in tourneys at Castle Gorlan, their silk-gowned ladies cheering them on, applauding their skills. Mentally comparing them to see these black-furred, misshapen creatures, he cursed again. The wargles, attuned to his thoughts, sensed his disturbance and stirred uncomfortably, pausing in what they were doing. Angrily, he directed them all back to their drill, and the chanting resumed. Morgorath moved away from the ungazed window, closer to the fire that seemed utterly incapable of dispelling the damp chill from this gloomy castle. 15 years, he thought to himself again. 15 years since he had rebelled against the newly crowned King Duncan, a youth in his 20s. He had planned it all carefully as the old king's sickness progressed, banking on the indecision and confusion that would follow his death, and split the other barons and give Morgorath his opportunity to seize the throne. Secretly, he had trained his army of wargles, massing them up here in the mountains, ready for the moment to strike. Then, in the days of confusion and grief followed by the king's death, when the barons traveled to Castle Arwen for the funeral rites, leaving their armies leaderless, he attacked, overrunning the southeastern quarter of the kingdom in a matter of days, routing the leaderless forces that tried to oppose him. Duncan, a young and inexperienced, could never have stood against him. The kingdom was his for the taking. The throne was his for the asking. Then Lord Nordholt, the old king's supreme army commander, had rallied some of the younger barons into a loyal confederation, giving strength to Duncan's resolve and stiffening the wavering courage of the others. The armies had met at Hackleton Heath, close by the Slipsunder River, and the battle swayed in the balance for 5 hours, with attack and counterattack and massive loss of life. The Slipsunder was a shallow river, but its treacherous reaches of quicksand and soft mud had formed an impossible barrier protecting Morgrath's right flank. But then one of those gray-cloaked meddlers known as Rangers led a force of heavy cavalry across a secret ford 10 kilometers upstream. The armored horsemen appeared at the crucial moment of battle and fell upon the rear of Morgrath's army. The Wargals, trained in tumbling rocks of the mountains, had one weakness. They feared horses and could never stand against such a surprise cavalry attack. They broke, retreating to the narrow confines of Three-Step Pass and back to the mountains of Rain and Night. Morgrath, his rebellion defeated, went with them. And here he had been exiled for all these 15 years, waiting, plotting, hating the men who had done this to him. Now, he thought, it was time for his revenge. His spies told him the kingdom had grown slack and complacent, and his place here was all but forgotten. The name Morgrath was a name of legend nowadays, a name mothers used to hush their anxious children, threatening that if they did not behave, the Black Lord Morgrath would come for them. The time was ripe. Once again, he would lead his Wargals into an attack. But this time, he would have allies. And this time, he would sow the ground with uncertainty, confusion, beforehand. This time, none of those who conspired against him previously would be left alive to aid King Duncan. For the Wargals were not only ancient, terrifying creatures he had found in these sober mountains. He had found 2 other allies, even more fearsome, the dreadful beasts known as the Calcara. The time was ripe to unleash them.